Well, thank you, Randy. And I want to thank Doris for those songs, especially that first one. Really, really told the message that I'm planning on giving today. So let me get the share screen up here and we'll have everything working in just a second. Okay, let's see. Okay, I've entitled this message today, Run and Hide, because that's usually our response to stressful situations is we try to run or hide to protect ourselves. And I wanted to tell the story of the Apostle Peter because he reminds us that no matter what, Jesus is the one who searches for us. Our instinct is to run and hide from him. Now, we often talk about people coming to Christ, and the reality is he's the one who comes and finds us because we're usually trying to run and hide. So let's go through some of the stories about him. The most often repeated command in the New Testament from Jesus is uh, don't be afraid. Some people don't believe there is a God. That's how they cope with their fear. I just don't believe he exists, so I don't have to worry about it. Some people believe there is a God, but want him to stay out of their business. That's how they cope with their fear of God. Some try desperately to get on God's good side, move from his naughty list to his nice list. And that's frankly works, guilt, religion. And a lot of us fall into that. Like we think we're on God's naughty list, so we got to do some good to get on his good list. And some religions that I'm aware of, and I know some in Christianity feel this, hope that their good works outweigh their bad works. So somehow, if they just come out a little bit in a plus, things are going to be okay. That's works, guilt, religion. Some are just terrified of God and think they're doomed forever because of their lifestyle. Yet, as I said at the beginning, most often repeated command in the New Testament is don't be afraid. But we still are. So let's start out the story in Luke chapter 5, an ordinary day at the lake. One day, as Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, I believe that's the Sea of Galilee, with the people crowding around him and listening to the word of God. Now, just think about this. He didn't strike people as being God. He just struck people as an ordinary fellow that had some really interesting things to say. And they just crowded around him. They didn't have television or, those sorts of things back then, cell phones. So they were standing around just listening to him. They were crowding around him because he had a way of talking about things in the Hebrew scriptures that they'd never heard it explained like that before. So anyway, he saw at the water's edge two boats left there by the fishermen who were washing their nets. So he got into one of the boats. The one belonged to Simon. That's Peter's name, Simon Peter. And he asked him to put out a little from the shore. So he sat down and he taught the people from the boat. Now, it was kind of a natural amphitheater, you might say, if you know how the ancient Roman amphitheaters were and even some modern ones are. Uh, it formed kind of a natural way of concentrating the sound as he was speaking sort of up the hill to them. So when he had finished speaking, uh, he says to Simon, put out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch. Now, as you know, they haven't caught anything. And if there's anything I've learned from fishermen, and I've done a fair amount of fishing in my day, and especially when you come up empty-handed, anybody, a total stranger, could make a comment, hey, why don't you fish over there? And we'll probably try it. Simon answered, he didn't know who Jesus was. I mean, he knew he was a person, a human being, ordinary looking fellow. Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything, but because you say so, I will let down the nets. Now, Peter had enough of a relationship with this Jesus fellow that he considered him his master or his teacher, had some authority over him. But, you say to do it, we'll do it. It's not the way we do it in the fishing world, but we'll listen to you. When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that the nets began to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them, and they came and filled both boats so full that they began to sink. I mean, it was just an extraordinary catch. Now, here's Peter's reaction. It was, leave me alone. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, "Go away from me, Lord. I am a sinful man." It's like he's Jesus, you have no idea what kind of a fellow I am. I'm a foul, crass, smart aleck knucklehead. What are you? I'm a fisherman, for crying out loud, and I'm a rough guy. And just please, you don't know who you're dealing with here. Anyway, how many of us have felt that? Look at ourselves and say, "I'm not the kind of person God would want to hang around with." And if he's hanging around with me, it's because he don't know who I am. Well, truth is, Jesus knew full well who Peter was. And he was a man that God had created, and there was a plan for him. Verse 9, for he and all his companions were astonished at the catch of fish they had taken. And so were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, Simon's partners. So we just a little idea about the relationship of these fellows that were going to become Jesus' disciples and apostles. Now let's move to Matthew 16, and let's get a little something else here about this relationship, because Jesus likes to have a conversation with us. And you may be thinking, "Oh, God doesn't want to talk to me. I don't want to talk to God. Just leave me alone. I got nothing to say to him. I'm not important. Why would he, But here, the disciples had been walking with Jesus for a while. And of course, Jesus was starting to gain some notoriety, some fame. And so he asked his disciples, he asked them, for crying out loud, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" He wants to hear from you. What do you think about this? What do you think about this? That's why discussion groups are so good, because everybody in the group gets to answer questions and ask questions. Verse 14, they replied, "Well, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." And there's a lot of people, they don't know who you are, but they're making all this speculation. Kind of happens today. People are not really sure about who Jesus is. And he says, "Okay, but what about you? What about you? You told me what everybody else thinks, but I want to know what you think. Who do you say I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Well, that was an amazing statement. Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by man, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. Death or the grave will not overcome it." And it's amazing. Peter probably didn't feel all warm and fuzzy, probably didn't hear a voice, but somehow he knew. By following Jesus, somehow he knew, and the Father had spoken to him or communicated to him somehow who Jesus is, the Son of the living God. Interesting. And then right after that, we find that Peter attempts to lead and not follow, because we're supposed to be followers of Jesus, not leaders of Jesus. And sometimes we forget that, and we set up our own little kingdom, and we expect God to grow our plan and our kingdom. But we need to think that over sometime. Matthew 16 and verse 21. From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, chief priests, teachers of the law, and that he must be killed, and on the third day be raised to life. Now this went really against everything that Peter had learned in his, like Sabbath school, for example, or in his culture. That just wasn't going to happen. And so he took him aside. Can you imagine? Peter, he's got a lot of courage and a lot of spunk, but he takes Jesus aside and he rebukes him. Chews him out. "What's wrong with you? Never, Lord. That's not the way kings work. You're going to be the Savior. You're the Messiah. People don't kill you. Wake up, guy. This shall never happen to you. You got it wrong. You better listen to me and my interpretation of the scriptures, not your interpretation, Jesus. You got the scriptures all wrong. You listen to the way I think it's supposed to be. You listen to the way our tradition says it's supposed to be." Well, Jesus turned and said to Peter, now before I quote what he said to Peter, I'm going to make something very clear. How you read this couple of sentences, you will read these from the vantage point of what you think Jesus is like. You will supply the tone of voice. You will supply the tone of voice. Your tone of voice in reading this may be wrong. It may be right. And I find myself wishing that sometimes this would have been like a play where there would have been something said, oh, and he said this in a stern voice, or he said this kind of like he was joking, or like he was kidding, or lighthearted. I don't know how he said it, but here's what he said to Peter. And Matthew writes it down. Get behind me, Satan. You're a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the things of God, but the things of men. Now, that's a pretty, what I would think would be a pretty harsh thing to tell your friend, that you're sounding more like Satan. You sound like evil. Did Jesus really say it that way to Peter? Like I said, I don't know. I don't know. I could read it a bunch of different ways. And hopefully one of these days, as I continue to grow and mature in the faith, maybe I'll be able to read that with the same tone of voice that Jesus gave it, and be able to receive it the way Peter received it. Ever proclaim your loyalty to God? I saw some of that being said in that last song that Doris played. The writer of the song was proclaiming their loyalty to God. So, John 13 and verse 36, Simon Peter asked him, Lord, where are you going? Because, again, Jesus was talking about that he was going to be crucified and going to be killed and so on. And Jesus replied, where I'm going, you cannot follow me now, but you will follow later. You know, it's impossible for you to go here, but eventually you're going to go here. Peter asked, Lord, why can't I follow you now? I'm a loyal guy. You know me. I'm always willing to, stand up for you. I'll lay down my life for you. And don't you get it? I mean, man, I'm a real stand-up guy. I'm for you all the way. I'm 100% for you all the way. And I think most of us who have followed Jesus for any length of time have had something like that happen, only to find out that we weren't as tough and as strong as we thought we were. Well, then Jesus said, looked at him again. How did he say that? With a twinkle in his eye, with a wink and a nod? Yeah, will you really lay down your life for me, Peter? You really going to do that? I tell you the truth, before the rooster crows, you'll disown me 3 times. You're not going to do it, buddy. You can't do it. Maybe he was chuckling. I don't know. It's again, we supply the tone of voice that we think Jesus used. And again, just realize that you and I may be wrong in the way he said it. We're not wrong about the words, but we may be wrong with the tone of voice. That's just something to think about. So, here was one of the most embarrassing moments of Peter's life. He let Jesus down. This was the 3rd time that he denied Jesus. Jesus was there, captive now. This is just a few hours before he was going to be crucified. And someone accused him of saying, oh, Peter, you were with that guy, weren't you? And Peter, for the 3rd time, man, I don't know what you're talking about. That's the fight or flight. Now he's fleeing. I guess, I can't blame him. I mean, when push comes to shove, we're not strong as we think we are. Just as he was speaking, the rooster crowed. And Luke records this. Luke did some really thorough research. He probably interviewed Peter to find out what happened. He said the Lord turned and looked straight at Peter. Peter probably admitted that to Luke. Man, that was tough. I denied him, and then he looked over at me, looked straight at me. Didn't say a word. He just looked at me, and I felt I wanted to crawl in a hole. You ever had that happen, where you got caught red-handed by your parents or by somebody, and you were just so embarrassed? Then Peter remembered the word the Lord had spoken to him. Before the rooster crows today, you will disown me 3 times. And his reaction was he went out and wept bitterly. I am an abject failure. I am no good. I'm useless. I let down my best friend, and now he's going to die, and it's my fault. It's my fault. You can just think about how horrible Peter must have felt. And I think all of us have had times in our lives where we've let somebody down, our parents, our siblings, our spouse, our children. a teacher, a trusted friend. We've let them down. I have. I'm guilty of letting people down, and I feel the shame. Shame is one of those horrible things that's embedded deep in us, and Jesus needs to take care of that, and he did with Peter, and he do with us. Now, Jesus had already appeared to the disciples a couple of times, but this is a very, I guess I would say, emotionally charged time in their lives. They had just followed a man for 3.5 years, saw him do wonderful miracles, and then they saw him brutally murdered and hung on a cross. They saw him put in a tomb, and then they saw him in his resurrected body 3 days later. And it's just, I mean, you think about, well, how would you feel? You'd be looking for normal. You and I would be looking for normal. I know that's how I feel when there's traumatic things have happened to me. I'm just looking for normal, for crying out loud. I want an ordinary, normal day, an ordinary, normal week. Just let me rest. And so that's what's going on here. After Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, it happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, called Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples were together. I'm going out to fish. And Peter says, that's what I'm going to do. I don't know anything else to do, but I know how to fish. This is going to go do that. It's normal. I just got to go somewhere to get refreshed. And there's no condemnation by John in his writing here about that. It's just what we human beings do. We have to somehow deal with the stress. And they said, we'll go with you. We'll go with you. I wondered off and on if maybe they were afraid that Peter was going to do the same thing that Judas did, take his own life because of how humiliated he had been. I don't know. I don't know how close he was to just saying, this is it, I'm done. Really done with life. Anyway, but they go with him. Of course, they were probably as stressed out as he was. So they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. So they're out there all night, just fishing, nothing's happening. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore. So who went looking for them? They weren't looking for Jesus, but he's looking for them. But the disciples didn't realize that it was Jesus. So there's Jesus on the shore early in the morning, and he calls out to them, maybe 100 yards away, 50 yards away. Hey, friends, have you any fish? No condemnation, no saying, hey, you knotheads, why are you out here fishing? Why aren't you out doing what I told you to do? No, there's nothing like that. Nothing like that. He knows. Calls them friends. And I think that tone of voice is just that of a friend. Friends, have you any fish? No, they answered, and didn't realize yet that it was him. John did, though, as you see later here. In verse 6, chapter 21 of John, he says, oh, throw your net on the right side of the boat and you'll find some. It's like, again, fishermen, we are very suggestible, especially when you haven't caught anything. Maybe they didn't know yet it was Jesus, but like, okay, well, this is what we've been doing, didn't work. Let's try something else. And when they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it's the Lord. He recognized it. And as soon as Simon Peter heard him say, it's the Lord, he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off. Now, let me just do a little speculation here. I know this is speculation. It has always bothered me that John would include that he'd wrapped his outer garment around him. It's my understanding that they generally strip down to their underwear, perhaps, to do the fishing. But if you're going to jump in the water, why would you wrap an outer garment around you? It's going to get wet. It's going to drag you down. I mean, here in Minnesota, you don't put on your extra clothing when you jump in the water to go swimming, and even in the summer, you don't do that. It's waterlogged. So anyway, I think, this is just my speculation, I think that he was so remember the time that he tried to walk on water and he almost drowned? I think perhaps that he's thinking now, I got this. I'm full of faith now. I'm a believer. I can run to shore. I think that's what he was trying to do. I don't know. It's just speculation. Just think it over. I may be wrong. Anyway, the other disciples followed in the boat. They weren't about to do what he did. towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from shore, about 100 yards. When they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals. There were fish on it and some bread. So Jesus had already been cooking breakfast. Can you imagine God of the universe cooking you breakfast? And you had just been out on the lake, totally failed at fishing, kind of in a way running from the stress you've been in, still kind of not believing what had happened. And he cooks you a meal. He cooks you a meal. So Peter climbed aboard. No, excuse me. Verse 10, Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish you have caught. He's not afraid at all to share the glory here. Now, he told them where to fish, but, you know, he lets us participate. He wants us to participate. And he says, that's your work. You did that. You caught the fish. Bring them here. This is something you can do. You know, this is something you can do. Simon Peter climbed aboard and dragged the net ashore. It was full of large fish, 153. And you can look that up. There's a lot of speculation as to why it's 153. But even with so many, the net was not torn. So that was another miracle. Huge fish, a whole lot of them, and the net didn't get torn. Jesus doesn't reprimand them. He doesn't say anything harsh to them at all. He just simply says, hey, come on over, have breakfast. You've been out there all night, have breakfast. Let's have something to eat. None of the disciples dared ask him, who are you? They knew it was the Lord. See, and that's sometimes we doubt. Does God exist? Does God exist? And when he sets about proving to us that he exists, and he will do that in his good time, you know it. You may be doubting for a little while, for maybe months or years, but eventually he will give us enough proof that we know it's him. Now, I want to just let us know the Greeks actually have many words for love, and I have to have this for the next verse I'm going to quote. I used to think there were just 3 Greek words for love, but there are actually about, 7 or 8. Agape, philia, eros, pragma, storge, ludus, and mania. Agape is a selfless, unconditional love, often used to describe familiar or spousal affection. You know, no limit, unconditional. It's a godly kind of love, the highest form of love there is. You know, the kind of love where you lay down your life for your friend. Philia, that's a deep friendship or brotherly love, often used to describe the love between people who share interests and experiences. Like, oh, I love hanging out with those people. Not that you would give your life for them, but you love to hang out with them. And eros refers to sexual passion or physical love. It's often used to describe the love between lovers. And you can look up the others if you want. Just Google Greek words for love, and you can find it. And this is why it's important. When they had finished eating, they just had that breakfast of fish and bread, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of Jonah, do you truly love, and he used the word agape here, the highest form of love. Do you truly love me more than these? Peter says, yes, Lord, you know that I love, and he uses the word philia, the word for friendship. You know that I love you like a friend. Jesus said, feed my lambs. Start out with the little ones. Little ones, just feed them. My lambs, okay? I am the shepherd. Just feed my lambs. Again, Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you truly love? And again, he uses the word agape. Do you truly love me? And he answered, yes, Lord, you know that I love. And now again, Peter uses the word philia, brotherly love, you. Jesus said, take care of my sheep. Sheep are a little bigger, right? A little harder to take care of. That's what I want you to do. The third time he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love? And now Jesus deliberately uses the word philia, brotherly love me. Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, do you love me? Philia. He said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I, philia, love you. Peter was now telling the truth. I love you like a brother. I'm not strong enough to give my life for you. I'm not strong enough yet to have that godly kind of love. So he's telling the truth. Look, if you're afraid of God, tell him. If you don't think God exists, tell him. but whatever you do, speak the truth. I mean, he already knows it. He already knows everything there is to know about us, so tell him the truth. He doesn't work with falsehoods. He wants the truth, even if the truth may be rather ugly and shameful. Tell him the truth. And he works with that. Because that telling the truth opens us up to healing. Telling a lie is a way of hiding. It's a way of hiding the truth, and healing can't happen when we hide the truth. Life seems to, can't read my own here. Let's see, life doesn't seem fair to us, does it? I have a part of that blacked out on my screen. Life doesn't seem fair to us, does it? And I need to address this as well. John 21 verse 20. It's one of the most hurtful things that we do to ourselves is we compete, compare, and contrast ourselves with others. So it's getting near the time when Jesus was leaving on the ascension. Peter turned and saw that the disciple whom Jesus loved was following them. A little bit of rivalry here. There was a different relationship that John had. John was more of a contemplative guy, I think, whereas Peter seemed to be more activist related. Anyway, this was the one who leaned back against Jesus at the supper and said, "Lord, who's going to betray you?" That's John. When Peter saw him, he asked, "Lord, what about him?" Because Jesus had just told Peter about how kind of difficult things are going to be in his life. And it's like, well, what about him? What about that guy? It's kind of like, I hope he's going to have a rough life too. And Jesus answered, and he answers this to all of us. If I want him to remain alive until I return, what's that to you? You must follow me. Stop competing and comparing and contrasting. If you're a pastor and you only got a church of 5, that doesn't make you any less of a pastor if you have a church of 5,000. If you are a farmer and you have a small acreage, you're still a farmer. You don't have to have millions of acres. Whatever it is, just follow Jesus. Size doesn't matter. If you, whatever, it doesn't matter. Stop comparing ourselves with one another. All it does was it just creates problems. Well, because of this, rumors spread among the brothers that this disciples would not die. It's like John wasn't going to die, but Jesus didn't say that he would not die. He only said, if I want him to remain alive until I return, what's that to you? Now, I added this this morning because I just had a feeling that maybe some of this would give the wrong impression, and I don't want us to think that the only profession Jesus cares about is the quote unquote professional ministry. Let's get rid of this sacred secular divide. Jesus cares about every profession. The Father, Son, and Holy Spirit have given each of us special callings. And maybe it's being a pastor, but most likely it's not, because there are lots of other occupations out there. You may be called to be a carpenter. My father-in-law, that's what he did all his life. And think about how much he provided for other people by being a skilled carpenter. A farmer. My father was a farmer. Think about how many people he fed. Beef, chicken, eggs, wheat, lots of things. He fed a lot of people. And my father-in-law did too. He grew up as a farm kid. Salesperson. Think about the necessity of salespersons to work between, and find the right product for the right customer. Vocational teacher, fisherman, fireman, mother, father, policeman. The list is just not limited to quote professional ministry. Just as Jesus trained and never abandoned Peter in his calling, the Lord will provide the training and will not abandon us in our calling or in our lives, whatever it may be. And there are times it's going to feel like he abandons us, but he never has, and he never will. Never. That's just not what God does. I want to conclude with this. I've shown this picture a lot of times. It's the Anastasis icon. It's such a powerful painting for me. And this was before the Eastern Church and the Western Church split. This was before the Protestant Reformation. This goes back before 1000 AD. It's a very, very old icon. And what it shows is Jesus going to the underworld, to the grave, to rescue all of humanity. The figure in white that's being pulled out of the coffin is Adam, a representation of all humanity, and Eve, the mother of all humanity. They're both being brought out of their graves. I'm not leaving you here, is what Jesus is saying to all of us. I will find you wherever you are, and I will rescue you. Amen.